Yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to this presentation. My name is Rina and I'm one of the partners of Million Labs.
Hi, I'm Simon, one of the other partners of Million Labs.
Yeah, and to get started, we would like to tell you a bit more about who we are. So Million Labs is on the vision to start or to build successful startups at scale. We see ourselves as a hands-on investor into idea stage startups and use NoCode as our tech step. To give you some numbers, we have worked with more than 1,400 startups so far in over 40 countries, and we have like founders with a lot of diverse backgrounds, and some of them even raised funds. So in total, like around 220 million. And to give you some numbers about our team, so we work around with 60 developers, a lot of marketers, designers, and startup advisors. On paper, we are UK-based, but the reality is we are fully remote and global. Some of our team members are also here, so really good to have you guys. And yeah, I think what really bonds us and where we're really passionate about is not only no-code itself, but actually how you can apply no-code to startups. Or in other words, how can you launch your startup in the smartest way? And this is what this presentation is about. So to start with, we will look at the principles of the lean startup approach, which we define as the old wave, and then we will link that to the new wave, which is kind of the no-code revolution, and we will tell you how this changed the process of launching your startup. To make it a bit more tangible for you guys, we will walk you through our Start, Launch, Grow framework, which is dedicated for no-code startups, and we will always make a comparison between traditional startups and no-code startups to make that difference a bit more clear. Good. Let us start, and let us start with a common problem that probably many of you have faced. Our clients don't know what they want, or generally, like, people oftentimes don't know what they want. And there is a good saying by Henry Ford: if you ask people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And the reason why we like this is because a lot of people just struggle to verbalize really what yeah, I see some nodding, that's good. A lot of people just struggle really to define or verbalize what they want. So what's really important is behavior. So where do your clients spend time on? What do they pay for? Where do they click on? So really, the question for founders and generally for agency owners and everyone is, I guess, how can you test or validate your idea in the cheapest and most quickest way? And now
Sorry, distracted. Yeah, so back in 2011, Eric Ries published this book called The Lean Startup. I'm sure lots of people have seen or read and heard about this. And this was born out of Eric's experience in building a startup in the kind of 2000 period. He did the classic thing back then, which was to rack servers, go put servers into a data center, to spend 6 months in a dark room coding, trying to build something, getting it done, long days, long nights, and then launched it, and then tumbleweed just blew across. No customers, no demand for what they built. What they built wasn't wanted. And he said, like, this is crazy. Why are we building startups like this? Doesn't make sense. There must be a better model. And he came up with this methodology here, which is the kind of build, measure, learn approach. So you build a little bit, you put it in front of the customer says that's great or that's not good, this is bad. You get that feedback, you learn from that feedback, and then you build a bit more. And you go around that loop as fast as you can, rather than build and then launch. You build a little bit, you launch, you build a little bit, and you learn. So that was the methodology that he proposed. Looks like we're still trying to find the language. The challenge with that, though, still the same problem in the build phase, is that the build bit was still slow and expensive. You still needed to find a developer at $150,000 a year to come and build that bit that you wanted to get out and launch, to test. And it still took time. It was still a fairly slow process. So this bit of the build, measure, learn bit was still slow. But came along NoCode. and changed that piece, because it now meant that actually anybody could do that build piece. You, me, any of the non-technical founders could actually do the build themselves. It got 10 times faster and it got 10 times quicker. So it means that you could go around that loop really, really quickly now, super quickly. So certainly something that we see is that we can now go to a minimum viable product, which is another phrase that was coined by Eric Ries, MVP. I'm sure you've heard of it, and it gets used and abused. And we can build something probably within 150 hours and in roughly 6 weeks time through testing, from design through to test through to launch. And that's only really possible, obviously, because of NoCode. If this was a coded world, we'd be talking more like 6 months, or something like that, to build out something of similar nature. So it's a lot quicker. But the challenge now was that we've got this new way and much quicker way of developing minimum viable products and getting things into market. But the challenge with that was that the old methodologies didn't really fit that. Actually, to go and do sprint planning, to do user stories, to do user journeys and stuff like that, just weren't quick enough. Actually, they were too long. You're spending 6 weeks building and 6 weeks planning. It doesn't make any sense anymore. You need to spend 6 hours planning and 6 weeks building. So we had to start to rethink the methodology behind how do we build in this new environment, which is NoCode.
Exactly, and I mean, there are probably many answers and many frameworks how you can tackle that. Today, we simply want to present you one framework that worked for us and that we built or came up with based on the collaboration with so many founders so far. The concept is called Start, Launch, Grow. And what we will do in this presentation is we will go through each of the phases and explain them to you in greater detail. And we will also make a comparison between traditional startups and no-code startups within each of these phases. But before we jump into details, let us start on a bigger picture. So what is this framework telling us? The main principle of this is only build what you need and iterate on it quickly. Now, I'm sure everyone will say, well, that's pretty simple. And in theory, it is. But we can tell you that the majority of founders that come to us really struggle with that concept. So I tell you a typical conversation. Hi, Arena, I want to build an app. Great, so tell me about your customers, what have you done so far? And this is where you really figure out, hey, people struggle and haven't really done the market validation. So because we are a startup builder, we tell them, hey, rather than building your whole product, build your landing page first. And this is what we will do in the start phase. So we put together a dynamic landing page and pair that with some analytics and then track kind of signups and some signals that you get from the market. And then only once the validation has been done, then we jump to the launch phase. And even in launch phase, I always challenge people to say, hey, which core features do you really need? It's always easy to make something complicated and fancy, but rather than making it perfect, we want to make it simple. And when you go to the market, when you launch your product, you can quickly get feedback. That's the beauty of NoCode. So in the grow phase, we will then look at customer feedback and find some ways of actually integrating the feedback to your project. And to make it a bit more interactive for you guys, we will present you one real case. Like Flickit, it's one of our startups, and we will basically use this as a guiding example. Flickit is like an Uber that connects riders to drivers, only with the difference that here it basically connects customers with real-world offers, so kind of discounts, promotion codes. That's a lot used in social media contexts, and they followed our process from start till grow, and we thought it's a good example that we can present to you.
Okay, so the start phase. If you just click on Verena. So this stage is all about this customer validation piece. And as Verena said, it's a real challenge because most people want to build something. They want to get building. That's kind of their drive. They don't want to do the hard work of, or maybe the boring bit of going and figuring out, is there a customer, is there demand, what's my value proposition, what's my unique selling point, all of these things. They don't want to do any of that. They just want to build, because in their head, they've already built the app with 1,000 features. You know, they know exactly what it needs to look like, and that's what they want to get building, because that feels like success, and it feels like I've got a startup now because I'm building something. So we kind of fight them a little bit in terms of trying to bring them back to the start phase. And this is all about that validation piece. So for example, with Flickit, they built out a simple landing page, one page that explains their value proposition to the customer. It has a waiting list on it. We drive traffic at that landing page to see into their customer demographics. So they, you know, that forces them to go and figure out, who is my customer? Where do I find them? Do I find them on TikTok, Facebook, wherever? Drive some traffic to that and see if we can get some sign-ups. And our kind of rule of thumb is, if you're doing a business to business, you need at least 50 sign-ups on your landing page. If you're doing a business to consumer, you need at least 1,000. Because roughly you're going to get about 10% conversion rate. So you might get 5 customers, or you might get, you know, 100 sign-ups to your actual product. So that's what we're driving for. That's what Flickit went and did. How does that compare to doing it previously in the coded world? Well, actually, not much has changed. A little bit, and we'll just cover on it. But mainly, it's the same thing. Still got to do market validation, whether you're doing code or no code. Doesn't make any difference. You still need to know there's customer demand, etc. The costs are pretty similar, and speed is pretty similar, actually. And the do-it-yourself approach of no code and in the kind of, I guess, coded environment is pretty similar. There are a lot of products out there that allow you to go and build a landing page, whether it be Wix, Squarespace, or a load of dedicated landing page products. So it's very similar. I think the key difference is that in the no-code world, we can actually adapt it. Rather than going picking a template off the shelf from a Wix or Squarespace for a landing page, you can actually really adapt it and build it in similar timescales to exactly your requirements and needs. So that's one change. And the second one, I think, and this is kind of lost sometimes, if you've ever done the landing page thing, you will find that you're chucking it away after you've done that, because your minimum viable product is rarely built in the same technology that your landing page was built in. Whereas in no-code, it absolutely could be. And we can take that through. So actually your landing page becomes your home page, which becomes part of the minimum viable product. So there's no throwing it away and starting again. Actually, you can take that on the journey with you. And the last one, I think, is if you're building this in no code, you can build all of it in no code. And again, if you've done landing pages before, you end up with a landing page product, a MailChimp, a HubSpot, Google Analytics. You end up with patching together quite a lot of products to get the kind of information that you need, the data that you need to collect. Whereas in no code, actually, you can have a single point of truth. So you can have all of that data in that one platform. So you can see exactly how many people visited it, what was the cost of acquisition, what was the click-through rate. You can do all of that in that single product.
Great. So let us now look at the launch phase, and probably this is the most exciting phase because it's getting real. I can launch, I can build a whole product, and this is also the phase where we see the biggest differences to a coded startup. So let us look at the journey. So prior to no code, a founder has 2 choices. Basically, you either look for a technical co-founder, which is quite expensive, or you try to raise some pre-seed funding, which is quite difficult, and probably not everyone likes that. So with no code, we found a way to have some alternatives. So you can either build it on your own, or you can look for an agency and get it built for less than a used car. So basically, your family, your friends, they all can become your investors. And this like opened the market for so many more people. So like nowadays, like almost everyone can start a company from everywhere in the world. And this really led to the fact that we see a lot of, or we see like a rise of bootstrap companies. So, and you know, like solo entrepreneurs. I think that not everyone wants to follow this venture capital model. It's great for many, and I think many industry really requires that. But there are also some people that we met that just want to replace their day-to-day job and just, have something like a lifestyle business. And we see that NoCode is really a catalyst for that. So there are a lot of, alternative models arising on the market in addition to the Silicon Valley-based models that we know. Good, let us look at some numbers and come back to our example, Flickr. So just as a reminder, Flickr was around 150 hours, like a project of 150 hours, so around 6 weeks, 10K, right? And now when we compare that to a coded startup, that would be like around more than a year of development time and like more than 100K. So probably not your friends will probably not be your sponsors. And when we break that down into the single elements, we can see that around 20% is usually for preparation, like doing basically the that work for the build phase, so scoping and design. So on average, we spend around 2 days for scoping versus around a month, right? And then for the design piece, around a week versus 2.5, I would probably say even 3 months. Design is still pretty high for us. We try to, make that even like we try to shorten that. But we also figured out that only because it's no-code also doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about your product in greater detail at the beginning, right? So we try, I'm sure a lot of you know Figma, right? So we use that for our design process and try to build a prototype so that people, again, can play around with something and say, yes, that's what I want, and we don't have too many changes later on in the process. Development time around 4 weeks versus 10 months. And then a bit of Q&A testing, which we usually cover. We spread out across like 2 days versus oftentimes, like many like departments being involved, etc. And then project management, that's maybe a bit surprising, and that can be probably quite different from agency to agency. So for us, it's usually just around 3%. And the reason why is because it's not that we expect our developers to do every job, but because no-code is so cheap, you also need to find a way of how to optimize your process for that. And we try to build a platform that has some project management features involved. So, there are always some repetitive tasks, right? Such as putting together a roadmap, sending calendar invites, having a follow-up, these kind of things. So these are basically included in our platform, and which is why we have, like, I would say, on average, like a very low project management part in comparison to 1 or probably even more weeks to a coded startup. By the way, if you guys have some questions in between, feel free to just raise your hands, and you don't need to wait till the end. Great, next slide, I like that. These figures mean nothing, if your no-code startup is operated in traditional ways. What does that mean? So we had some examples where people came to us and they showed us a spec of more than 120 pages, and then they introduced 3 different departments to us, like design and prototyping and this, and they really challenged our model, right? It's not like founders come to us and just do what we say, right? There are also some that say, hey, I know it better, and that's fine, right? But we just figured out, I think if you really talk about no-code, right, it's really challenging to combine the traditional world and the no-code. So really, our learning here is if you innovate and have a great no-code tech stack, that's great, but that's just the first step. You always need to also adjust your operating model, because both will go hand in hand, and only both will make sure that you succeed and can also, make changes along the way.
And I think just to add to that, as Verena said, you can take a traditional coded model, apply it to no code, and make it the same length as a coded product. You can make the project last as exactly long as a coded project by applying that wrong model to it. So that point is well made. You can easily spend 6 months building a no-coded app by using the wrong model against it, and we see it all the time. So last phase, grow. So you've launched your minimum viable product, been launched out into the market. Thousands of customers are now arriving at your door, maybe. But the growth phase is about that first 10, that first 100, that first 1,000 users onto the platform. That's what we're focused on now, is getting you beyond that. And to be honest, this is when the work starts. The actual up to this phase was relatively easy. And certainly the tech's not the hard bit. This is the hard bit for most startups, is the sales and the marketing, the lead generation bit. This is where it gets tough. But one of the key things that you need to do with NoCode is that speed of iteration again, is get it into the market as early as possible. And as Verena said, minimum viable product, not the viable product or the product that the startup founder had in their head. It's the minimum bit. And so again, we spend a bit of time going, do we really need that feature? Do we really need that feature? Are you sure? Because we can always add it, and we can add it really quickly. And I think most startup founders that have never worked in NoCode don't realize how quickly you can add things. And so they always want to get it in there before they launch. But that speed of iteration is absolutely critical. So we get it out there in front of the customer, start getting feedback, and we can iterate. And I think the mind-blowing thing for most customers is that they can give a bit of feedback, and 2 hours later, it's implemented into the app. And they're like, how the hell did you do that? Because they will have never seen anything like that before. Because if you think about a traditional coded environment, they're working in sprints. You're probably talking about a month away from having any of those features that you just spoke about, if you're lucky, into the app. Maybe 3 months, probably more likely. So now you're going from 3 months to maybe 3 hours, and it's integrated into the app, and it suddenly appears, and you're like, how the hell have they done that? So that's amazing to customers, and that's one of the things that will keep the customer coming back going, okay, these guys are on it, they know what they're doing here, and they'll keep giving you feedback, and you can iterate. One of the challenges that we always get asked, and anybody that's working in the no-code industry will always get asked this, performance and scalability of no-code. When am I going to have to rebuild in code is always the answer, or always the question. And the thing that we will say to startups is, you might need to. We don't know when, and anybody that's worked in no-code will know that we don't know when, because there's a lot of factors that depend on that. But if you have that problem, you've got a good problem. That's the best problem in the world to have, is that I need to scale outside of no-code. And for most startups, they never even get this far. They never get to the scaling. And as I said, in 1,400 startups, we've had 4 that have scaled out of no-code. The rest are still either operating profitably, revenue-wise, in no-code, or for a few cases where they've had to move on. But that's fine. They have revenue, they have customers, they're going through that process. And again, if anyone's done coded startups, the reality is that the minimum viable product that you build in code, 18 months later is not the same product that you had then. You're rebuilding the thing. You end up with technical debt. You end up with, why the hell did we do it that way? You end up rebuilding it anyway. So this is not, I think, as big a problem as maybe the startup founder wants to make it into. It's really not. And as our facts and figures kind of show, we're just not seeing it. Most startups can scale actually very well into their first year, 18 months, 2 years, and still stay in the no-code environment.
Yeah, so back to our initial question, how can you launch your no-code startup in a smart way? We put together 3 main learnings for you. Number 1 is, as I mentioned before, you always need to make or adjust your operating model to your tech stack. So it's never only one or the other, but they really go hand in hand. And it's important that you look at that process before you get started. The second one, and I would say that's probably the most underestimated one, is your mindset. And that's not only for no-code startups, but overall. There's this group of people that are always talking about things. And then there's another group of people who are just doing things. You want to be in the second group, right? So you want to really just launch your startup and basically appreciate to fail fast, because you will fail, and make just failure part of the process. And it's just, I think when you grow along the way, you will see failure also helps you to get a lot of feedback and actually know what you should change for your next iteration. And this brings us to point number 3. Keep your launch really simple, right? Don't strive for perfection too early. right? It's always easy to make things complex, right? But instead of making it perfect, make it simple and try to get feedback early on, because as Simon mentioned before, no code really makes that possible. More than any other like platform so far, we can actually go there and really change the logic and make things. So rather talk to your customers, because in most cases we think something else than what will happen later on.
So our Start, Launch, Grow framework actually is not just about mapping a new framework to no-code startups. Actually, for us, it's about, can we use this framework to improve the success of a startup? And speak to the academics, and they'll tell you it's a bit of an art, it's a bit of a science. We are trying to make this into a science. Because we have 1,400 startups and they're all following roughly the same process, and within these processes, within Launch, Start and Grow, we have about 100 sub-points of things that we think that they should do. And we're gathering data, and we're pulling that data in and feeding it into, of course, an AI engine, into a machine learning, etc., to try and understand, actually, is there some common factors here? A B2B in the medtech space did this, this, and this. Did that work for the other medtech in the B2B space? And can we take that data and analyze it? And I don't think, I've worked in incubators and accelerators before and with investment funds, and I've never seen this data to this granular, because nobody's following a process as detailed as ours. So this is giving us a unique insight. And so with this data that we're gathering, we're starting to see some trends. The startups that do start and do this landing page and get to the 1,000 users on there are about 47% more likely to have revenue at the launch phase or into the grow phase than if they didn't do that. So we're starting to see, actually, this works. I'm not saying it's the only methodology out there, but it's starting to show that it works. And we're starting to gather a lot more of that data. So I think over the next coming years, we're going to have a really interesting data set that we can apply to startups to say, hey, look, guys, and in our platform now, we're starting to show metrics back to say, well, this is the benchmark. By this stage, our average startup had 50 users. By this stage, they had 100 users, and by this stage, they were revenue generating. So you can start to benchmark yourself against other startups in your type of field, etc. And I think that's unique, because that just doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And it's one of the problems with a startup is you kind of go into it, there's loads of advice out there, but trying to apply it to your startup and to know what to do next and where you should be in the process is really difficult. So hopefully this is going to help.
So that was our presentation. We hope you got some insights, and if you have any questions or want to share one of your experiences, feel free to raise your hand and we are happy to answer them.
Like when you were mentioning the roadmap and then you shared some impressive numbers, like with scoping, I was wondering how realistic that is. Scoping went from 4 weeks to 2 days. Can you maybe elaborate more on that and how that takes shape? Because there are impressive numbers.
Yeah. Yes. So I think scoping is, probably one of the most underestimated parts, right? And it's like always easy to, just skip some bits, right? On the other hand, you can also spend really months, right, on every picture and every piece, and you can write down every step of the app. We try to find some middle ground, right? So we have an in-house tool that we used, and basically it gives you a framework of 3 different pieces. So number 1 is, first of all, understand the project on a higher level, right? So what is really the target group, the problem, etc. Number 2 is you go into user journeys, right? So like on Miro, we map out, like, let's say you have a 2-sided marketplace, mentors, mentees, right? You really go through the journey of each, right? And put that into cards. And then number 3 is, how do these pages now look like, right? And this is where design comes into play, and where, this design piece is then also outside the scope, right, of the 2 days. The design piece is then really putting, first of all, a low fidelity screen, like really just sketches, and then putting that into a real prototype like design on Figma also. So this is our 3-step process, right? Whereas the first 2 steps are usually done within 1-2 days, right? And then the design piece is another week. So. Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the talk, first of all. We're also like a small agency building apps and starting to incorporate NoCode. We're called Seriflat. And we were wondering, well, we're starting to see how to work between like designers and developers in NoCode. And obviously with NoCode, we also have the opportunity to bring designers in the development process. So I was wondering, and maybe the second question is also what NoCode tools you're using for that and how you're kind of incorporating this in your workflow.
Let me take that.
You can take it, yeah.
With difficulty. That's the answer, I think. Actually, Vereen's probably closer to this. So yeah, our designers design in Figma. Most of our apps are built in Bubble, although we do other no-code platforms. It just depends on the startup's requirement. But I think Bubble allows us to go with a depth, and it probably covers most use cases. But yeah, it's always a challenge. I mean, we have to train the designers. And we have to train the developers or help educate them to make sure that whatever's designed in Figma is doable in the no-code platform that we're using, and vice versa for the developers to know how how you can achieve that particular feature in there. It's hard. I mean, there are, for example, Bubble does support converting Figma into Bubble. It doesn't work. I'm sure if there's anyone from Bubble here, it doesn't work, guys. And there are some other solutions. We've seen there's some guys out there that are doing Figma into code. It'll come. So I think it won't be long before maybe we don't even need designers with AI or developers or whatever. Anyway, that's our talk tomorrow, where actually you can just convert straight in. But it's a hard process, and we have quite a bit of friction. I think I'm looking at some of our developers. We have quite a bit of friction between the design and the developer phases, but that's natural.
What would be something that is not doable? Where is the complexity kind of barrier being, hey, processing data, doing complex algorithm, we can't do it in
In
no code.
no-code. So if we take some of the 4 that have had to go out of no-code, mostly, and it depends on the no-code platform, so I'll just caveat that, it depends. Some are better at some things than others. It's mostly to do with data, volume of data and crunching that data. So we have a company called Product Locker who scrape product data from Amazon, like millions of rows from Amazon, and they're getting, I think, real-time pricing information and product information, etc. And they're doing it on a regular basis because products change in the marketplace. And then they want to crunch it and give data back to the user on, right, well, you should start selling this product because it's ranking and it's rating high, etc. That is breaking no-code at the moment. It just can't deal with that volume of data on that regular basis. So it's those things.
And just adding to that, like what we do for some of our apps is to add Zano to it, right? Just to make it a bit quicker and make the database a bit more robust. However, and also in the case of Product Locker, you can really see that it really slows down the app overall. And we try to do it again as like the next step, but we are pretty sure they are one of the 4, right? Like where I think we need to switch to a tech stack.
Yeah. And low code becomes an option at that point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sorry. Thank you very much again. You talked about speed is more important than being perfect. But at the same time now, we see that there's a shift in expectations from consumers in how things should look. I mean, in the 90s when I started out, if you had a web page, that was good enough. Now there's a minimum level which is kind of a bit higher than before. How do you make sure that your designs and your implementation sits above that sort of minimum level of sort of hygiene, design, functionality level, so you don't sort of ruin your experiment with a too sloppy, too fast kind of design implementation?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's very important. So speed doesn't mean that we don't need to care about what we do. I think what we wanted to point out is there are always parts in your app that are more important than others, right? And instead of trying to cover everything, we try to look at the one or two key features in your app that that you really need to validate your market, and we make them like really great, right? So we do like invest time in design, etc. However, also back to the design a bit, we see more and more really alignment between no code development work and design work, because in the end, I mean, design is super important, but because these projects are in general like very like low cost, etc., you also try to not invent the wheel the whole time, but basically take some existing design templates, right, and then just like adjust it to the branding of the customer, etc. But yeah, I think it's really important to focus and then make that one piece very great, and then be very open, I think, also to your target market and say, hey, that's phase one. What we learned is like oftentimes people try to hide, right, where they are in the journey. And this is then what I think can confuse your target market. But when you say, hey, look, we invested in our first iteration, we want to test this piece, what do you think about it? And then, set the expectation, that might help along the way.
I'll just add to that. I think that mindset is partly the challenge that startups have, is it's got to look good. And I'm not saying it doesn't, and I'm not saying it can't, because it can, with the right design skills, and as Verena said. But the reality is, you think you're going to launch to thousands of customers knocking on your door. You are not. Our stats show that if you get to 50 customers or 50 users, you've done bloody well compared to the vast majority. So it might not look perfect, but you're only upsetting 49 users, right? They'll get over it, or you'll find a new 49 users. And if there's only 49 users in the world, you've got other problems, right? So I think it matters a lot less than you might think it does. And people are much more accepting. I agree the bar's gone up, but I think people are more accepting. Stick beta on there. Communicate with the customers that were on your waiting list anyway, saying, hey, we're launching into beta. We know it's not perfect, but we'd love your feedback. Great, done.
I run a small agency as well.
Yes.
One of the questions that comes up with people that are either using no code or want to use no code is investability. So founders have this notion that if you use a coded solution, somehow you have IP and you have control and ownership of the IP. And if you're using a no-coded platform, somehow you're not. I'm just curious to know how you would address that question.
Yeah, I think it's something that founders hear because they're being told no, and it's an excuse. We're being told it's time up. Oh, I've got to hold it better. Sorry. No, I'm being told I've got to hold the mic better. Yeah, I think startups hear it, but because it's a reason that they've been told no, not because it's a reason. If you've got revenue, you've got loads of customers, who cares what tech stack you're on? It doesn't matter, right? You'll get investment because it's a good business. So I think, to be frank, it's bollocks. Excuse my French. It's, yeah, that's an investor looking for an excuse not to invest. Because, and we've got we've just had a medtech in Germany just raised 2.5 million euros, all built on a no-code platform. So it's totally doable.
Just about not worrying about scaling up. We actually tried to do an MVP using Glide for startup on Check Easy, health tech. And what we could see is that about 20 users, it was too much, and the cost was pretty high. So I think that's not the same with Bubble. That is can scale up faster than the other apps. I was wondering if you tried some more recent technologies, stuff that worked and that stuff that didn't work, and if you could share your experience.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, Glide's a great product. Don't get me wrong. Adalo, there's lots of them out there. They tend to be limited. They're great for the very simple prototyping, etc. But you kind of know that you're going to have to chuck it away and build in something else. And that's a pain. So although building in something like Bubble is probably more expensive in the short term, because it takes a bit longer to build, etc., you probably need some help, or you need to go and learn no code. In the longer term, it lasts you longer, so it'll go further for you. So that's why we tend to build in something like that. But we've tried all sorts. just delivered our first low-code product in a project in a technology called Wappler. So that actually generates code. It's still visual. It's very Bubble-esque, but it allows us to, churn out actual code, which will obviously some startups like that because they, if it's not in code, they're not interested. So this is another option, particularly where we think scalability and that data crunching might be a challenge. Then we might go straight to low code.
Yeah. Just also adding to that, when we look back at our start, launch, grow methodology and what Simon pointed out, like the single source of truth, right? We kind of, like, this was one of our criteria when we picked one of the no-code or low-code platforms, is that it will, that people don't need to change the tech stack within that process, right? They can reach scale, right, without having to change the whole thing, right? And yeah, Bubble is one of the platforms, but we look at others, as Simon said. I think it's also a question of, do I do it on my own or do I go to an agency? So I think for a software, a Dalo, even Glide, I think people tend to also, be more involved in the production or the build process. Whereas for us, I mean, we run some boot camps, but most of our customers, they don't really want to touch it, right? So they're really non-technical, and that's fine, right? So, so yeah, we just set it up for them. But this is also one of the criteria there.
Thanks
for the talk, guys. Obviously, you guys have launched a lot of startups. Would you say there's a trend as the types of companies that come your way? Are you looking more B2C apps, or do you ever see sort of pure play B2B SaaS tech companies come to build the next Airtable, for example?
I can give you the stats. I think we are 51% B2B and 49% B2C, so it's almost 50-50. And in terms of category of app, number one is marketplaces, and that covers quite a lot of things, but it might be an Uber-esque or it might be an Etsy, lots of marketplaces. Second, I think, is medtech. I think third is fintech. And then it goes down, and then SaaS platforms is probably there, but that kind of covers lots of stuff as well. So those are the type of things. And I think Verena said at the very start, the beauty of what NoCode has brought to the market is that, lots of people thought, well, I can't compete with Airbnb because they're a billion-dollar organization that spent $1 billion on tech. Well, suddenly we're seeing niches, just an Airbnb for a little region in the UK or a region somewhere in the world. We're seeing people actually just take those models and just do niche applications within those. And I think that's great for it. And actually, there's a good market. You can easily get to a 10 million turnover business inside a niche very easily. Who knows, you might get acquired by Airbnb at some point because you're doing something that's a little bit more niche in that area. So I think that's the beauty of what NoCode's brought to the market, is we're seeing an explosion of apps. Oh, okay. Agreement. Any last questions?
Yeah, maybe just to build on the stats question, have you noticed a narrow shift in terms of like who's coming to you as a founder? Has there been a change of dynamic of a founding team, whether they come with different skills and backgrounds? And do you have maybe a stats breakdown on the founders that you have?
Yeah. I don't know if we've got stats. I was thinking about this the other day. We should run female, male stats, etc. But certainly we're seeing more diverse from. I mean, still our biggest customers are US, UK, Canada, Australia, so kind of Western countries. But and then obviously into Europe. But actually, the diversity has got much bigger. I mean, we were looking at the map the other day of where we've done work with, and I think Mongolia we haven't. There's a few gaps, but actually pretty much everywhere else we've done at least one startup in that area. So I think that's because the cost levels come down. We're seeing that. But in our boot camps, so we run some free boot camps as well that teach Bubble, etc. The diversity there is just phenomenal. I mean, literally is every country in the world where we've had somebody come on and they're trying to DIY where maybe the price bracket isn't quite down enough, but they could learn it themselves and do it.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, that approach us start on their own, actually. But what we also see is that a lot of people who already started a company, and start, the second one or so, they also kind of trust NoCode, right? So at the beginning, we also worked with the UK government, and basically there were a lot of founders, like, very early on in the journey, idea stage, and idea stage is our, our focus, but people, you know, like who start for the first time, right? So it was a lot of education also to do, right, on how to not only build your app but basically launch, right, along the way. And I think what we see in some of, you know, our latest calls is really people who talk about other businesses. So I did that business and it was like that. Now I have another idea and I want to build it on no code because now I think it's way quicker, etc. So I think the experience level goes a bit up overall. Yeah.
I think the other thing that we're seeing, which is mind-boggling to me, is we're seeing startups that are already got a product in market in code coming to us to have it moved to no code because of the speed, because they're fed up of waiting for agency or tech team to go through a sprint 3 months later, get something into the market. They're like, we can't deal with this. And so they're spending the time and money just to rebuild it in no code, which is like mind-boggling.
Thanks for the presentation. This is a bit of a loaded question. What is the best alternative to Bubble in the market today?
Alternative. Really hard. We've just, some of the team just spent some time going and looking again because there's lots of new stuff coming to the market in the last couple of years. We've looked at WeWeb. I'm trying to think, what else have we looked at? Yeah, Waplo, which is a low-code platform. But we looked at a bunch of them. And our honest answer is we don't think there is yet. I'm not saying there won't be. But at the moment, it covers so many bases. It allows you to go, you know, a mile long and a mile deep, whereas a lot of the platforms are kind of an inch deep, maybe a mile long. And that's a real challenge because you butt up against challenges really quickly with some of the other platforms. But I think something like, you know, if you're technical, WeWeb with a different back end, you know, with back-endless or Zano or something like that, is going to be a good solution. But I would hold fire because there's a new breed of AI native no-code apps probably going to appear in the next 18 months, 2 years, and I think they'll be killer because it'll be a voice interface probably, etc. So we'll wait.
Have you tried AppFarm? We use AppFarm quite a lot, and we feel that it brings the same to table as Bubble, but
Okay.
it's even more in depth. Just have you had any?
No experience at all. No.
Is AppFarm, I think, also for enterprise, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. I've spoken to someone actually last year on a summit about AppFarm, and yeah, I mean it's probably, you know, like even more scalable and made for that. But you know, I think for our target group, like Bubble seemed to be, you know, a better fit.
The other challenge, obviously, is working with startups. The price point of their, you know, ongoing costs got to be at the right level as well. They've got zero revenue and likely to have zero revenue for quite a few months. So, you know, if it's suddenly $750 a month to run the tech stack, it's probably out of most startups' price range. It just doesn't make sense because they know they've got 6 months probably at least before they've got revenue coming in.
Maybe just one note also to that, because we were looking at that, you know, ongoing cost a lot, and I think for Bubble, I mean, so far it was also like very easy, right, or very cost efficient because you have just like a very small licensing fee, $20-30, right? Now they changed the pricing a bit, but we looked actually at the stats in our portfolio, and because what we mentioned before, not so many people actually reach that grow and stage and, you know, don't have that many customers, they're actually not so much affected by, you know, like the new pricing of Bubble. So for us, this is not like the main reason why we also look at other platforms like Waplo or so on. I think it's still a good fit for most people really to go through that start, launch, grow journey and still have low running costs.
Last question, anybody?
From what you described, is it for people that know that they want to grow, or is it just for experimentation? You know, is there self-selection into people that don't know really where it's gonna go, if they're gonna do it, and just a side business?
I don't think so. And I believe everybody thinks they're going to grow. Like, and that's always the question in the sales process is, how scalable is it? How far can I go? How many users can I have on the platform? You know, these are all logical questions for startups. So I think they all think we're going to have 10,000 users by the end. You know, we hear all the stories. Well, end of year one, we've projected 1 million users, and year two, it's 5 million users. And we're like, yeah, great. Yeah, it'll scale, it'll be fine. Because, you know, the reality is it might actually, depending on the use and what they're actually doing. But also, most startups just aren't going to get there. So I think it's a perfect solution for 99% of startups. unless they've got that really hard data crunching that they're going to do. And we can identify that really up front in the scoping, so we can suggest a Wappler or something. We have done little bits and pieces in it, but we don't use it much. No particular reason, just we've ended up in the bubble house, I guess.
It's also mainly for native apps, right? Isn't it, Flutterflow?
Yeah, I think they're expanding out of that now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last question.
On the recent hullabaloo, for lack of a better word, on the bubble pricing update in terms of like capacity to workload units and then everything that's kind of unfolded from there.
Yep.
Has that shaken your faith at all, or are you pretty much just steadfast, we'll write it out and we can get around it?
Are you from Bubble? Okay. If I'm honest, we've been with Bubble long enough that we've seen, I think this is the third shaky moment that they've had where they've launched something. They turned back on the other two. They've stuck fast on this one. But I think as Verena said, for our startups, it doesn't matter because most of them will be on plan 1 or plan 2. And so we go from $34 to $130. That's fine, right? Because they won't get to that kind of thing. I mean, their logic and so forth makes no sense for anybody that's a non-technical, they're selling to non-technical people and they're selling a very technical, conversation around how do you price this and how do I work out how much it's going to cost. Like, we can't tell the customer what it's going to cost. Bubble can't tell us what it's going to cost. Nobody bloody knows. So I think it's chaos. But I don't think it matters. It matters for us as a business because we built our platform on Bubble and we are at the top end of their thing. So it matters to us actually more than it does to our customers. Good. Let's call it a day. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.